When I was discharged from the hospital and returned home, a banner still hung on the wall, celebrating Su Chin's first work anniversary. Brightly colored balloons and flowers were scattered on the floor. Shin Qing, wearing a thin, gauzy slip dress, directed the maid in cleaning the living room. She glared at me, unable to conceal the disgust in her eyes. "You finally decided to come back." My gaze fell on the several glaring red marks on her fair skin. She coldly pulled up her slipping strap and turned to go upstairs. The resounding slam of the door made the maid beside me shudder. In the past, I would have rushed after her to appease her. But now, I just sat silently on the sofa, gesturing to the maid to make some hot soup. Soon, Shun Qing returned, standing angrily in front of me. Her breathing was rapid, but she remained silent. As always, waiting for me to apologize. I lowered my head and silently stirred the hot soup in the bowl. Shun Qing, in a fit of rage, overturned the dining table. For a moment, the bowls and dishes on the table crashed to the floor with a clatter, accompanied by the maid's cry of surprise. "Lin's son, have I given you too much leeway?" Shun Qing clenched her fists. "Fooling around outside for so many days? Are you dead? Not even a single message." She poked my forehead forcefully, trembling with anger. I raised my head and looked at her with icy eyes. "Shouldn't I be the one asking you about fooling around?" As if greatly insulted, her face flushed crimson, and her tone became sharper. "What's wrong with a superior caring about a subordinate? A guilty conscience sees dirt everywhere." I lowered my eyes and fiddled with the ring on my finger. "A subordinate? You cut my safety rope for a subordinate. In your eyes, a subordinate's life is more important than your husband's?" I choked back my words, suppressing the surging bitterness in my heart. She froze, unnaturally avoiding my gaze, her sharp tones suddenly softening. You've forgotten what you used to do, but I haven't. Besides, it wasn't that high a fall that day, and besides..." She crossed her arms and looked down at me. Her gaze fell on my legs, her tone full of disdain. "It's not a big deal even if you fell from that height with those legs of yours." A surge of anger welled up inside me. I abruptly raised my head and stared at her fiercely. The first time I met Shin Qing, I was a firefighter. She was sitting on the edge of the rooftop, her eyes vacant and her face haggard. No matter how I tried to persuade her, she kept murmuring, "It doesn't want me anymore." Finally, I found an opportunity to grab her hand, but she suddenly jumped. Luckily, colleagues had already laid out an air cushion downstairs. To protect her, I did my best to have her fall on me. She was unharmed, but my legs were crippled, and I had to wear prosthetics. Now, she so casually reopened my wounds. It made all my years of devotion seem like a joke. My silence gradually made Shun Qing realize something. Her eyes held a trace of guilt, and she softened her expression, reaching out to take my arm. "Lin's son, I flung her hand away, my eyes bloodshot. "Let's divorce." The guilt in Shun Qing's eyes instantly turned to rage. "How dare you? For so many years, I haven't despised you for being a freeloading cripple. What right do you have to ask for a divorce?" She furiously shoved me. The still-healing surgical wound instantly tore with a searing pain. I clutched my abdomen, staggering and falling to the ground. My hand landed on shattered porcelain, scarlet blood spreading. I gasped, my body chilled. The company was founded by me, even though I later handed it over to her due to my physical condition. I was still constantly using my previous connections to develop new clients and secretly arrange them for her. At first, she would excitedly hug my neck and tell me about the new orders. Later, Suchin appeared by her side as a male secretary. She stayed out later and later, often going on business trips at the last minute. Whenever I couldn't reach her, I could always find updates about her on Suchin's social media. Laughing and watching cooking videos together, making a blueberry cake. On a midsummer night, they lay in a tent on a mountaintop, watching the starry sky. Traveling miles to see a grand fireworks display, smiling at each other under the dazzling fireworks. I mentioned these things to her many times, and she always dismissed them. Childish, boring, annoying. It turns out those words weren't referring to my wishes, but to me. Her preference was already known to everyone. Only I refused to face the facts, deceiving myself by covering my eyes and ears, humbly trying my best to please her, waiting for the day she would change her mind. But in the end, I became the freeloading cripple in her words. Shin-Ching frowned and walked over, struggling to help me up. Impatiently pulling out the sharp porcelain shards, she muttered, "Why is there so much blood, you?" The smell of her perfume made my stomach churn. I instinctively tried to push her away, but she grabbed my wrist. "Why are you still being stubborn in this state? I'll take you to the hospital." In the car, she kept carefully observing my expression, occasionally making small talk. But I only felt it was noisy and closed my eyes, not wanting to pay attention. "Why are you stopping the car here?" I frowned. "This wasn't the hospital. I have something urgent to do. Wait in the car. I'll be right back." Shin-Ching hurriedly left with an anxious look. The summer heat quickly raised the temperature inside the car. The high temperature made me break out in a cold sweat. Drowsily, I tried to push open the car door, only to realize it was locked. Listening to the unanswered ringing of my phone, my breathing grew heavier. I forced myself to stay conscious and search for anything in the car that could break the window. In despair, I finally found an emergency hammer and smashed the window. I stumbled out of the car and found that across the street was the company I hadn't stepped into for almost 3 years. Coming to my senses, I frowned and walked into the company. While waiting for the elevator, a man stood in front of me, his voice deliberately lowered, saying something in a broken manner. "Almost done. The person I'll deliver to. The money you promised me. Don't worry, when the time comes, you can play with her however you want." The elevator arrived, and the man slowly walked in, turning to face me. It was Su-chun. A flicker of panic crossed his eyes. Then he looked at me with amusement, his eyes full of provocation. I stared at him, bewildered. Success in what? Sending someone where? What money? A series of questions tangled my thoughts. The elevator doors slowly closed. Su-chun tapped his fingers rhythmically on the metal handrail, looking at me mockingly with his chin raised. I finally came back to my senses. With a grim face, I waited for the next elevator to the top floor office. But the company staff had completely changed. No one recognized me. The female assistant stopped me at the door. "Sorry, I can't let you disturb Mr. Shin without an appointment." I impatiently took out my phone, but Shin-Ching's calls went unanswered. Su-chin's social media had updated. I said I was feeling a little heated, and she immediately rushed over to help me cool down. Remembering how I almost suffocated in the extremely hot car just now, I furiously pushed the assistant aside and pounded on the office door. The commotion quickly attracted a large crowd of onlookers. "Sir, if you continue like this, I'll have to call security." The female assistant picked up the walkie-talkie. I laughed in anger. "I'm Shin-Ching's husband, and I founded this company. What right do you have to stop me?" The crowd erupted in an uproar. Those surprised, contemptuous, and mocking looks fell on me. "I've never heard that, Mr. Shun is married. You must be lying. Mr. Shun is rich and beautiful. How could she fall for a cripple? You can't be sure. Maybe this guy is rich, Mr. Shun's secret." The office door was suddenly pulled open. Shin-Ching stood there, her clothes disheveled and her face flushed. Her eyes scanned the crowd, and she suppressed her anger, saying in a low voice, "Have I given you too little work to do?" The crowd fell silent instantly, lowering their heads and dispersing. I looked at Su-chun behind her, casually fiddling with his watch, and a surge of anger rose in my heart. I rushed into the office and punched him in the face. Shin-Ching screamed and pulled me away. "Lin's son, are you crazy? I told you to wait for me in the car. What did Su-chun do wrong? Why did you hit him so hard?" Recalling the words I had heard at the elevator, and thinking of my years of history with Shin-Ching, I took 2 deep breaths, clenched my fists, and softened my tone to persuade her. "He's not a good person. Getting involved with him won't end well." She chuckled. "And are you so clean? Disappearing for so many days, who knows which slut you were fooling around with. And now you come back and want a divorce." I felt an unprecedented exhaustion enveloping me, both physically and mentally. "I've said my piece. Take care of yourself. I turned and left with heavy, weary steps. But Shinching suddenly rushed forward and grabbed my wrist. You've made such a scene today. You must apologize to Suchin publicly. Otherwise, what credibility will he have in the company? My breath hitched, and I looked at her in disbelief. This face had never seemed so disgusting to me. I instinctively tried to break free. Still weak from my recent surgery, I fell to the ground during the struggle. My prosthetic leg came off and rolled to the side. I struggled to crawl over and retrieve it. But Shinching walked over slowly in her high heels and kicked the prosthetic leg away. She squatted down, a sneer playing on her lips, and patted my cheek gently. You punched him? I'm just asking you to apologize. That's not too much to ask, is it? Suchin coughed lightly. Mister. Shen, I'm fine. He is, after all, your... Shinching interrupted him coldly, looking down at me. Look at Suchun, how magnanimous he is. For so many years, I've supported you, indulged you, all because you saved me back then. But now you're getting more and more demanding. Do you want to use these two useless legs to hold me hostage for the rest of my life? She turned and sat on the sofa, crossed her legs, and took a sip from the wine glass Suchin handed her. You've been clinging to me like a leech, flattering me like a dog, just for money, haven't you? She tossed a black card at me disdainfully. This is 100,000. Later, I'll call a meeting with all the employees. You apologize to Suchin in front of everyone, and say you are? Shinching looked at Suchin inquiringly. He sneered. Why not say you're a distant, poor relative coming to ask for money? Shinching patted the back of his hand, laughing heartily. You're so clever. Let's explain it this way, so the employees won't gossip. I felt a surge of rage that almost burst through my chest. But without my prosthetic leg, I was completely defenseless. I glared at them venomously, enduring the pain from my surgical incision, practically grinding my molars to dust as I crawled inch by inch towards my prosthetic leg. Shinching suddenly smashed her wine glass on the floor. She rushed over furiously, grabbed the prosthetic leg, and slammed it against my head. How dare you refuse my kindness? I've treated you well enough all these years. Who are you putting on this act for? She suddenly remembered something and took a wooden box out of her desk. Since we're already at this point, why don't I give you another surprise? She pulled my hair, forcing me to look up. After seeing what was inside the wooden box, all the blood rushed to my head. My eyes turned crimson, and I let out a low growl. Never had I hated myself so much for saving her as I did at that moment. The box was full of photos of Shinching and Suchun. Most were taken on campus, before I knew Shinching. She was pictured with a high ponytail, wearing her school uniform, sitting on the edge of the sports field, her eyes focused on the boy playing basketball. In another, she wore a blue-green dress, standing in the spotlight, singing a solo for the school's 50th anniversary celebration. Another showed them riding bicycles through a tree-lined avenue, dappled summer sunlight filtering through the leaves onto them. I rubbed each photo, my breathing growing heavier. The first time I met Shinching flashed through my mind. She looked at the clear blue sky, tears welling in her eyes, her voice choked with sobs. He doesn't want me anymore. So, that he was Suchun, and I, to save her, became permanently disabled, painfully giving up my beloved career. Yet after all the twists and turns, they still ended up together. I suddenly couldn't stop myself from laughing hysterically, no longer caring about my dignity, letting the tears flow freely. Then what was I all these years? No wonder I could never understand how a stranger could so easily replace me. So important that, in a life-threatening moment, Shinching could abandon me without hesitation. Yet I was foolish enough to think that by treating her 1,000 times better, she would change her mind. How ridiculous! In the end, I was just a clown, toyed with in the palm of their hands. The mockery in Shinching's eyes deepened. She carefully put the photos back into the wooden box. Now that you know everything, I hope you'll know your place and stop bothering Suchun. I'm not ungrateful. You're still my husband. I'll take care of you for the rest of your life. She picked up my prosthetic limb and, with her head bowed, helped me put it on. She gestured for Suchun to help me up. She gently stroked her belly. Suchun and I are having a baby. After that, you can stay home and take care of the child. Didn't you say you loved children? As compensation, I can give you 200,000 in living expenses every month. I stood frozen, staring blankly at her, trying desperately to recall and confirm every word I had heard. Seeing my silence, her expression turned displeased. What? Is it not enough? I haven't even brought up your disappearing act and fooling around outside all this time. Don't push it. 300,000. Hurry up and get ready to apologize to Su Chun. My heart felt like it was being crushed by 1,000 pounds, suffocating me. The instinct to survive forced me to pound my chest. A salty, sticky taste surged up my throat. The last image before I lost consciousness was Shin Qing frantically calling my name. I had never seen her so distraught, but I was just so tired. I wandered in a dark, endless space. Everything I touched was nothingness. Vaguely, I heard someone sobbing and murmuring something in my ear. I struggled to open my eyes, the person's face coming into focus. Shin Qing's eyes were red-rimmed as she leaned over my hospital bed. Her voice was hoarse. Why? Why didn't you tell me you were hospitalized? I scoffed, the movement pulling at my wound, making me gasp in pain. Was there a point? You don't even care about my life. What's a hospitalization? Shin Qing's face turned ashen. I really wasn't thinking straight at the time. I thought that you'd said you were always first in the rock climbing competitions, and you hadn't climbed very high, so No point in talking anymore. Let's get a divorce. Now that you're pregnant, you don't want the child to be born illegitimate. I stared at her icily, impatiently brushing her hand away. Shin Qing guiltily averted her gaze and brought over a bowl of hot porridge. She gently stirred the spoon, and the antiseptic smell of the ward was instantly filled with the fragrance of scallions and rice porridge. She smiled tenderly and offered me a spoonful. Looking at the few scallions sprinkled on the white porridge, my stomach churned with nausea. Disgusted, I knocked the bowl out of her hand, the hot porridge splashing onto her hand. Her fair skin instantly turned red. Seeing her eyes welling up with tears, I felt nothing. Stop this charade. Get out. Shin Qing's face flushed crimson, her knuckles gripping the bed rail, turning white. She struggled to contain her anger. Lin's son? Do you have to be like this? I've already apologized so humbly. What more do you want? Divorce, I said expressionlessly. Shin Qing glared at me, her mouth opening and closing without a coherent word. After a long silence, she suddenly chuckled. You're in your 30s without any skills and crippled. After our divorce, how are you going to support yourself? Picking up trash and sleeping under bridges? She casually adjusted her sleeve. All right, stop throwing a tantrum. Rest well. I'll come see you in a few days. Wait, what? Change your mind already? Shin Qing turned, a playful look on her face. You want me to apologize to Su Chen, right? The day after tomorrow afternoon, I'll go to the company. Tisk, you're quite sensible. I'll keep my word too. After you apologize, I'll give you the 100,000. Chin raised, her eyes full of mockery. She clicked her high heels out of the ward. I sighed and took out my phone, scrolling through my contacts. New and old accounts, time to settle them all. The appointed time arrived quickly. The large conference room was packed with 100 employees. Su Chen stood next to Shin Qing, whispering something. Occasionally, Shin Qing would let out a coquettish laugh, completely ignoring the strange looks from the employees below. It seemed she didn't care about the rumors at all. She just wanted to humiliate me publicly and vent Su Chen's anger. Seeing me arrive, Shin Qing coughed twice. I know everyone has been talking about what happened a few days ago. Today, I've specifically asked the person involved to clarify. After today, if I hear anyone discussing this matter again, they will be fired. She sat down leisurely and gestured for me to go on stage and apologize. I turned off the lights and turned on the projector. Shin Qing's expression gradually became confused, until our wedding photos appeared on the screen. Then, bit by bit, her and Su Chen's betrayal played out, magnified on the 100-inch screen. The employees below erupted in an uproar. What's going on? I thought this man was CEO, Shun's distant relative. Why did they have a wedding? No wonder Su Chun got promoted to chief assistant without any skills. Turns out their relationship is so shady, disgusting. I don't even want to work for this kind of woman. Yeah, doing such disgusting things in the office and forcing the original wife to apologize to the mistress, truly shameless. Shin Qing's face became distorted, and she shrieked for someone to unplug the projector. The lights in the conference room flicked on, illuminating the various expressions of the crowd. Shin Qing trembled with rage, yelling for security to drag me out. Lin's son, this isn't over. Security swarmed in, grabbing my shoulders. Shin Qing stormed over, her hand slightly trembling as she raised it. Wait! A middle-aged man walked in, his voice carrying an undeniable authority. After seeing who it was, Shin Qing's face changed dramatically, and her speech became stammering. She forced a flattering smile, bowed slightly, and stood respectfully beside the middle-aged man. Mr. Li, what brings you to my humble establishment today? She continued. You didn't even let me know beforehand so I could prepare. Look at this mess. I'm so embarrassed. Then she said, Su Chun, quickly take Mr. Li to my office. Mr. Li waved his hand impatiently and walked towards me. With a gentle expression and a slight apology, he said, Mr. Lin, I'm so sorry. There was an unexpected issue on the way, which caused a delay. He glanced coldly at the security guards beside me, signaling them to release me. I straightened my collar and smiled slightly. It's all right. You're here now. Shin Qing froze, looking at me with a complicated expression, at a loss for what to do. I sat down at the head of the conference table, coughed twice, and signaled for the noisy employees to return to their seats. I understand that you don't recognize me. After all, I haven't set foot in the company for almost 4 years. But I think everyone knows Mr. Li. He's been the company's biggest client in recent years. It's safe to say that it's thanks to him that the company has managed to survive during this economic downturn. Besides Mr. Li, Mr. Chun, who handles orders in South China, and Mr. He from North China are also my friends. Now that I'm officially back, I'll be taking back all management authority of the company. If anyone wants to leave with Ms. Shin, you can step forward now, and I will give you double severance pay as required by law. But if you're willing to stay, I can offer a 15% annual salary increase on top of your current salary structure. The employees looked at me excitedly, and spontaneous thunderous applause erupted. Shin Qing stood there, her face pale, wanting to speak but stopping herself several times. I ignored her and walked past, saying, Let's part ways amicably. I advise you not to make things too difficult, and I might still leave you a way out. Shin Qing followed me to the office. She grabbed my arm, forcing a smile that was worse than crying. Lin's son, I didn't know you were helping me so much behind the scenes, I sat down on the sofa, playing with the glass in my hand, a hint of a smile playing on my lips. You're not angry with me, are you? She stood there awkwardly, with an ingratiating smile. I only felt extreme amusement. How insignificant I must have seemed in her eyes before. After everything that had happened, she expected me to act as if nothing had occurred. Shin Qing, are you going to leave on your own? Or should I have security drag you out? Her breathing became rapid, her face turning increasingly ugly. After holding back for a while, she finally exploded in anger. You think you're so great just because you have some money? She continued. Let me tell you, Su Chen has assets worth tens of millions abroad. She finished with, since you're so heartless, I'll fly abroad with Su Chun next week. Don't come crawling back to me begging for forgiveness then. She slammed the door and stormed out. Watching her disappearing figure, I suddenly remembered the phone call Su Chun had made at the elevator. I narrowed my eyes slightly and took a sip of my wine. Well then, I hope you and Su Chun won't be crying and begging me to save you after you go abroad. With a serious expression, I dialed a number. Mr. Chen, I've thought about the offer you gave me last time. I'm ready to go to Shenzhen tomorrow. Clients had always hoped I would move to Shenzhen for development, where my annual salary could be multiplied several times over. But Shin Qing had always been reluctant, saying she preferred a simple, comfortable life. Now it seemed that perhaps she had been waiting here for Su Chen's return all along. I packed my luggage and left the home I had poured years of my heart and soul into without looking back. Just as I exited the airport, I saw a woman with a high ponytail and a tight skirt waving at me with a bright smile. "Are you Mr. Lin? The company sent me to pick you up." I nodded slightly. "My name is Su Yin, your new assistant. Please let me know if you have any needs." She politely extended her hand. My new workstation was busy. I barely had any free time to think about anything else. However, Xinqing kept sending me messages, always looking for trouble. "Lin's son, where did you put that purple floral dress you gave me? I said you had another woman, and you wouldn't admit it. It's just a divorce. Do you have to disappear completely? Are you playing hard to get with me? Let me tell you, I'm so happy with Su Chen every day. Look, this is what he just bought me." I looked at the intimate photos of her and Su Chen with a blank expression. After a moment of silence, I sent a message. "Do you know how much you look like a jumping clown right now?" I deleted the chat and blocked her on WeChat. My phone immediately started vibrating like crazy. I forgot. I hadn't blocked her phone number yet. I blocked her number with a practiced ease, just like how she used to treat me. "Mr. Lin, the headquarters has arranged a welcome dinner for you tonight. Would you prefer the dark blue or dark gray suit?" Su Yin held a folder and looked at me inquiringly. I rubbed my temples. "You can take care of these small matters." The evening sky was filled with the glow of sunset. The head of the headquarters waited for me at the entrance of the group's hotel. "Mr. Chen has been praising you constantly. After 6 months, you're finally willing to come to Shenzhen for development." She patted my shoulder affectionately and discussed the new project with me. A familiar voice suddenly sounded from behind. "Lin's son, you're really something. Turns out you found yourself a rich woman." Xinqing held the arm of a tall woman and looked at me playfully, with undisguised anger in her eyes. I was confused. Shouldn't she be abroad with Su Chan right now? Why did she come to Shenzhen? I don't remember her having any friends here. "What cat got your tongue now that I've hit a nerve?" Xinqing suddenly raised her voice. "I apologize, Director He. I'm sorry you had to witness this private matter." I bowed slightly and signaled for my assistant to take the director into the hotel. I looked at Xinqing with cold eyes. "Have you forgotten? We're divorced. There's nothing between us anymore." Without waiting for Xinqing's response, I turned to leave. But she relentlessly grabbed my arm. "Who are you pretending to be? You said I was having an affair with Su Chen. But who knows who cheated first?" Su Chen walked over from the side, jingling his car keys, and put his arm around Xinqing. "Lin's son, you really are a ghost that won't go away. You even followed us here. Get out of here if you know what's good for you." He lit a cigarette and looked at me provocatively. "Looks like I didn't hit you hard enough last time." Xinqing twirled her hair and sneered. "Tisk, I thought you had more backbone. Looks like you're still the same as before." A piece of gum stuck to me. After settling the director, my assistant trotted over. "Mr. Lin, do you need me to handle this trouble for you?" Customers entering the hotel were attracted by the commotion and gathered around, whispering. Some even took out their phones to record. I lowered my voice. "These people are disturbing the other guests. Have security escort them out." The assistant quickly contacted the security department, and soon a group of security guards surrounded us. Su Chen's face was flushed with anger. "My uncle is the manager of this hotel. How dare you lay a hand on me?" He made a call with a fierce look in his eyes, threatening us with dire consequences. After a while, a middle-aged man in a suit hurried over. Su Chen immediately waved excitedly at him. "Uncle, it's this guy. Get security to drag him out." But the middle-aged man rushed up to him, raised his hand, and slapped him hard. "Apologize to Mr. Lin right now." Su Chen looked at him in disbelief. "Uncle, are you mistaken? Who does he think he I?" The middle-aged man, furious, rained blows down on Su Chen, his eyes suddenly turning fierce. Su Chen's expression turned timid, and he apologized in a low voice, extremely reluctantly. I played with my watch mockingly and said coldly, "Just watch your mouth in the future. Others might not be as easygoing as me." Su Chen abruptly raised his head, veins bulging on his forehead, his eyes wishing he could tear me apart. The middle-aged man slapped him hard on the head. What are you looking at? I'll gouge your eyes out. Get out of here. You're an embarrassment. He bowed deeply to me. I'm so sorry, mister. Lynn, I apologize for the trouble he's caused you. CEO, he and the others are already waiting for you in the private room. I nodded slightly and walked past the three, whose faces had turned the color of pig livers, as if they were invisible. Security swarmed forward and forcibly dragged the three out of the hotel. Ching struggled desperately. Don't touch me with your filthy hands. The sound of ripping fabric followed. Half of her back and arm were exposed. Her skin was covered with shocking bruises and swelling, causing gasps from the women in the crowd. She clutched her clothes in panic and looked up at me quickly. Seeing my indifferent expression, her eyes were complex. Resentment, grievance, perhaps. For a fleeting moment, I saw a hint of regret. Su Chun glared at her fiercely and dragged her arm as they hurried out of the hotel. Watching their disappearing backs, I wondered why they were here. Could I have misheard them on the stairs that day? I shook my head. It had nothing to do with me anymore. This was the path she chose. No matter how bitter it was, she had to swallow her pain and keep going. The new project handed over by management had many areas I wasn't familiar with. I worked overtime almost every day until the early morning hours. Whenever I tiredly raised my head, I could see Su Yin sitting not far away, working alongside me. The prolonged exhaustion and late nights caused my old illness to flare up. Clutching my cramping abdomen, I slumped over my desk, drenched in cold sweat. My consciousness faded, and the last image I saw was Su Yin rushing towards me with a worried look. She kept calling my name, but I didn't have the strength to respond. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. She was holding my hand, slumped over the edge of the bed. My movement woke her. Hungry? I'll go buy you breakfast. Before I could speak, she gave me a gentle smile and hurried out. It had been a long time since anyone had cared for me like this. A warmth spread through me. Soon, she returned to the ward with several bags of breakfast and carefully propped up my pillows. She tucked her hair behind her ears and gently stirred the porridge in the bowl. Steam rose from it. The aroma filled the room, and my rumbling stomach betrayed my hunger. I scratched my head sheepishly. She smiled brightly and offered me a spoonful of porridge. It was my favorite bokanji. I could still see bits of dried scallop inside. No wonder it smelled so good. I took the bowl and ate the entire portion contentedly. Thank you, Mr. Lynn, don't work so hard. Headquarters has given us plenty of time. There's no need to rush. Your health is the most important thing. She mumbled, head down, while clearing the leftover food from the desk. But I didn't expect to see Xinqing again so soon. When Su Yin helped me home, there was a disheveled woman sitting at the door. She cried out in fright, Mr. Lin. The sound startled the woman, who abruptly stood up. It was Xinqing. She looked much thinner, her usually meticulous makeup now replaced with a haggard appearance. Her eyes were dull and lifeless, with dark circles underneath and bruises on her face. Her messy hair made her look like a ghost, startling me as well. How did Xinqing become like this in just a few days? She stumbled over and grabbed Su Yan's arm. You slut seducing my husband. She raised her hand to hit Su Yin in a fit of rage. I grabbed her wrist and slapped her hard. Are you crazy? She's my assistant, and we're already divorced. I shielded Su Yin behind me and said softly, You go back first, I'll handle this. She hesitated for a moment, then obediently nodded and turned to leave. Then be careful and try to talk things out. Turning back, Xinqing was in tears, looking at me in disbelief. Lin's son, you're actually defending another woman in front of me, and even hit me for her. You're doing this on purpose to anger me, right? Seeing her irrational behavior, I only felt extreme disgust. Where's Su Chin? Why are you looking for me? Hearing that name, she seemed to be greatly frightened and instinctively cowered in the corner. She hugged herself tightly, her expression full of terror, and kept muttering, Don't hit me, don't hit me. I sneered. What? Didn't you say he would always tolerate and spoil you unconditionally? Get out of here, or I'll call the police. Xinqing frantically crawled over and hugged my leg. I was wrong, Lin's son. I beg you, save me. I squatted down, gripped her chin tightly, and looked at her coldly. He was just joking with you. Don't take it seriously. Shin Qing's eyes widened, her expression changing from confusion to shock, as if she suddenly realized something. Her lips trembled, trying to speak, but fear kept her mouth shut. I forcefully pried her fingers off and kicked her hard. I warned you, didn't I? But you insisted on self-destruction. This is the path you chose, so finish it on your knees. Shin Qing broke down crying, covering her ears and shaking her head frantically, her expression manic. It's not like that. Lin-sen, please forgive me. If you don't help me, he'll really beat me to death. You used to love me so much. Let's remarry, okay? I promise it won't happen again. Didn't you want a child? Let's have another one, okay? I sneered, so she knew I loved her deeply and wanted a child. But how did she respond? She exploited my love and trampled on my dignity. Every important holiday, every time I was sick, every time I was down, every time I needed her, she was always with Su Chun, unconditionally trusting him, always taking his side. When I had a kidney stone attack, writhing in pain, I begged her to take me to the hospital. She merely glanced at me indifferently. I'll call an ambulance for you. I have to pick up Su Chin's cat later. He'll be unhappy if I'm late. Even that day, after rock climbing, with all those alarming wounds on my face, she chose to ignore them, instead accusing me of framing Su Chun. It was utterly ridiculous. She knew how much I wanted a child, yet she secretly took birth control pills, letting me look like a fool, waiting every day in the nursery for our baby's arrival. Thinking of this, a raging fury threatened to erupt from my chest. My expression indifferent, I casually rubbed the key in my hand. You stupid, venomous woman. How could you ever be worthy of being a mother? Shin Qing's expression was filled with anguish. She dropped to her knees with a thud, kowtowing repeatedly. She seemed to feel no pain. A crimson pool of blood spread on the tiles, yet she continued to bang her head against the floor. Isai, she had brought this upon herself. I was about to call the police when a figure darted out from behind me. He yanked Shin Qing up by her hair and slapped her hard twice. If you dare run again, I'll break your legs. He glared at me. I advise you to mind your own business. I smiled faintly, shrugged, ignoring Shin Qing's pleading gaze, and stepped aside to let them pass. Su Chin covered Shin Qing's mouth and dragged her away. I watched their disappearing figures, hesitant about calling the police. Although Shin Qing's life or death meant nothing to me now. The words I'd overheard in the stairwell, and the young woman Shin Qing had been with at the hotel entrance, gave me a sense of unease. Coupled with my previous professional habits, after a moment's consideration, I chose to call the police. If Su Chun was truly involved in those dealings, perhaps this would prevent more women from being harmed. It was all I could do. I informed the police of everything I knew and handed over the surveillance footage from the hallway. Unfortunately, I was too late. The police discovered that Su Chun and his group had already fled, along with a large group of young women who appeared to be unsuspecting victims lured under false pretenses. Further action required higher-level authorization and cooperation with international authorities to plan a transnational operation to pursue Su Chin's group. This would take a considerable amount of time. We can't guarantee your friend's safety during this period, the officer told me regretfully. I nodded slightly. It was all her own doing. As long as no more innocent people were involved, that was enough. For a long time afterward, I received no further news from the police. My career flourished. My annual salary multiplied several times, and the company awarded me a significant amount of stock. Even if I stopped working, I would receive millions in dividends every year. Lin's son, am I being too lenient with you? Shin Qing clenched her fists. Most of the time, I preferred a life of freedom. Wealth wasn't the most important thing to me. I resolutely resigned from my job, planning a world trip with the dividends. Su Yen also unwaveringly submitted her resignation, abandoning her burgeoning career. We traveled through many countries, finally choosing to settle in a small village in southern France. During our travels, the police officer contacted me. He said the large-scale international police operation based on the clues I provided, had led them to a large trafficking organization. They had dismantled numerous clandestine operations run by the ringleader. The scenes were horrific. The victims had all suffered immense physical and psychological torment. They had rescued a large number of innocent people who had been tricked into going abroad, but Xinqing was not among them. Su Chen had accidentally fallen off a cliff during the pursuit and was confirmed dead. On behalf of the rescued victims, I thank Mr. Lin for the clues you provided. Unfortunately, we couldn't find your friend, the officer said, his voice choked with emotion. After consoling him, I removed my SIM card and tossed it into the sea. It was all over. The next chapter of my life would be a complete departure from the past. I bought a small house facing the sea in Nice. The sea was crystal clear, like jelly, breathtakingly beautiful under a clear sky. The beach was always bustling with people. Every day, watching the children playing in the sunset, the couples cuddling, the elderly strolling along, I felt incredibly happy and content. There was a lemon tree in the courtyard. Xinqing and I lay in rocking chairs, gazing at the azure sea, smiling at each other. She gently stroked her belly, looking at me mischievously. Lin's son, you're going to be a dad. My eyes widened, my heart overflowing with joy. I excitedly reached to pick her up, then stopped, chuckling self-consciously. Kneeling beside her, I gently rested my head on her belly, feeling the tiny life within. I gently held her hand, my eyes slightly red. Thank you, Su Yin. She poked my forehead affectionately. Silly, aren't you? The summer sun filtered through the lemon tree, dappling her face, reflecting in her eyes like 1,000 shimmering stars.